All right, welcome to this next talk then. I'm going to talk about a few things that I think are just interesting within flying and might help people be safer. There's also a very good article that just came out that H wrote at Hibblestow, which some of you might have read. So if you want to ask questions about that or discuss it, then please just stick your hand up at any point. And I'm more than happy to just talk about flying things as well as just talk rather than present them. So the aim of this presentation is just to increase your knowledge a little bit of what your pilots might be thinking about, what additional concerns they might have throughout the flight. I haven't been flying that much in the last year, so some of you might not realize that I'm a pilot as well, newer jumpers. So every now and again, I will be flying the aircraft. I actually started flying after I was skydiving, so I already had, I don't know, a few hundred jumps probably by the time I had started flying. It was always something I wanted to do. Right, to start off with then, a little bit about weather. So you may or may not know that flying in the UK for parachuting needs to be conducted VFR. So what does that actually mean? It means we need to have 5 kilometers visibility in front of us, which for us is the ridge over there. And that's actually more strict than what skydivers might need a lot of the time. You don't need to be able to see 5 kilometers because you're not going that far, hopefully. We also need to be clear of cloud, both horizontally and vertically. So we need to remain 1,000 feet clear of cloud throughout the time that we're flying vertically. Definitely can't go through cloud. That would not be VFR, which is why it's one of the reasons why we don't often jump in cloud in the UK. But the major reason is because the skydivers need to be able to see their opening point, their landing point from the point they intend to open. And it's not actually flying that prevents us from skydiving in cloud. How do your pilots get that weather then? Well, we look up. That's what we've just been doing, I think, in the last 15 minutes, and we've seen that there is potentially an opportunity to go flying. But we also use things called METARs and TAFs, which are meteorological area forecasts and terminal area forecasts. So they tell us what's actually going on at an airfield, and they tell us what is likely to happen later on. They're forecasts for pilots and real reports of weather. They come out looking like this. Nobody tries to work out what that means anymore, is the honest answer. We all use an app of some kind. My preference is one called AeroWeather. And what it does is it takes all that information which comes in words, and it tells us, this one's at East Midlands Airport, our closest one. It might tell us that the ceiling and visibility is okay at this time. And later on, they're expecting there to be few clouds at 4,500 feet. So this is how your pilots are assessing weather a lot of the time. We're using area reports from local airfields, and we're using the forecast to see what's going on at the local airfields. Other types of weather we're interested in then, we use wind forecasts. Form 214 is the one from the Met Office. You can actually access this. There's a free version of it that any pilot can access, but I don't see why you guys couldn't create an account as well. Go on the Met Office website, and that produces this forecast over here. And if we know which box we're in, we can see what the wind should be doing at various altitudes. Now, if you're like me, then you like using your phone. So there are some apps you can use out there. There's one by Mark Schultz called Upper Winds, I think, which is really good for looking at what the upper winds are doing. And then the truth is, for working out what the spot should be, we use our experience. The pilots are going to discuss it with Richard or whoever's on drop zone control for the day. We're going to look at these forecasts, and we're going to have a pretty good guess at what it should be for the first load of the day. We don't sit there doing lots of calculations, is the truth. We just know, because we've seen enough different wind conditions and directions, we have a pretty good idea of where we should put people out. As the day goes on, we might apply a little bit of a fudge factor. How many groups are on the aircraft? If there's only one group, for example, then we can be a little bit more decisive with the spot. We can put them out exactly where they need to be. Are we running into the airfield? And if we're going this direction, for example, Rich and I prefer to put the spot a little bit deeper because it keeps people away from that beer line. If we're going in this direction, we prefer to put the spot a little bit shorter because that keeps people inside the airfield. So that's how we're coming up with all these numbers. I'm going to come on to a little bit later how you as experienced jumpers can help us to dial in the spot for a day. The last thing that might affect our spot then is the ground speed. If we have a particularly fast ground speed for a day because there's low upper winds, or we might even be running in with a tailwind, we might choose to start the spot shorter to allow us to get everyone out in the space over the top of the airfield. Any questions on spotting and what your pilots might be thinking about? Nope. I'm going to move on to exit separation then. This is something I've identified, if you like, if something I don't think we're the best at Skydive Langer. It's something I think we should get better at, and a lot of drop zones should get better at as well. It's how we communicate this and make sure jumpers know what it is. So the goal of exit separation is to achieve horizontal distance between jumpers upon opening to avoid canopy collisions. That's the only reason we do it. Avoid canopy collisions, but also near misses. You might find if you open particularly near to someone on a jump, it really puts you off for the rest of your canopy flight. All you're thinking about on the entire way down is, wow, I was really close to them. And actually what we want you thinking about is how to land safely, not about the other people who are near to you. They don't have much exit separation. So why don't they need exit separation? Well, because they're not moving forwards. It doesn't actually matter if they have a canopy collision, they just bounce off of each other. So it is the fact that we have square parachutes that move forwards that means that we need exit separation at all. So if we have two people opening in this manner, we're flying towards each other. If we don't react within a suitable time frame, we are going to have a canopy collision, which is the second biggest killer in skydiving statistically year on year. That might look like that. Or it might look like that. It looks like they've managed to bounce off each other. They're probably not in the best mindset to complete the rest of their canopy flight. So how much separation? This is the bit I find kind of interesting. There's never been a meeting of skydivers who decided how much separation there should be, as far as I know. But we seem to have agreed on it as an international community. So we're thinking about reaction times. If you were flying head on towards someone else, how much reaction time would you like to make a decision? Let's.
About 4 seconds if you're 100 meters apart.
100 meters is about 4 seconds. Yeah, Paul. 10. Anybody go higher than 10? Does anyone want 15 or more? Just raise your hand. Yeah. Some people want 15, 15 or more. Anybody think that 5 seconds would be enough? Just out of interest. So Paul was actually spot on. It seems to be about 10 seconds is what we've agreed. So with a canopy that moves forwards at roughly 50 feet per second, so we're assuming we're all jumping canopies that move forwards at 10 meters per second. If we want 10 seconds to react, we need 1,000 feet separation at the point that we open, which is approximately 300 meters. Which if you look at most of the charts that are available online or that drop zones put in their aircraft or on their info boards or whatever, they're all working to about 300 meters at the point of opening, which gives us 10 seconds, assuming we're jumping canopies that go about 20 miles an hour. Now, if myself and Chris open facing towards each other, we don't get 10 seconds because we're going faster, but we've used the exact same numbers that everybody else did to base our exit separation on. So if we're jumping in groups, then we might have left enough time between the door that the ground speed of our aircraft has created separation, but everybody wants to track. So if we've chosen to track up or down the flight line, we might have taken our 300 meter separation. We've all tracked 100 meters towards each other. We've now closed that horizontal distance to 100 meters. And now we've only got 4 seconds to react, as John correctly pointed out, or 3 seconds. So we can reduce the exit separation. We can reduce the horizontal separation that actually gives us on opening by the amount we've moved during our jump, maybe because we've tracked up flight line, and maybe because we've drifted. Some groups drift more than others. I won't go much into that now. So to get back to our 300 meters, our 1,000 feet that we chose we wanted, we actually need to exit with 500 meters separation. So that's the job of a jump master or experienced load organizers, the people organizing these jumps, to think to themselves, I'm actually in a bigger group. Some of these people are going to need to track roughly in the direction of the flight line. We are closing our horizontal separation. How do I mitigate that? I leave more exit separation. Why not longer? Some people wanted more than 15 seconds at the beginning there. Well, if we have 10 exits, that's when my alarm bells start ringing as a jump master or a pilot. If I've got to get 10 people out over the airfield, that's pretty hard going. That's a lot of groups. With 300 meters separation, that gives us a 3,000 meter long jump run, 3 kilometers to get everybody out of the aircraft. That's 1.6 nautical miles. That's what that looks like at Skydive Langer. If we started that jump run over the airfield, 1.6 nautical miles puts us all the way out here for the last group. And that's if everybody left the correct exit separation. So if we're going 100 knots across the ground and everybody left 1 extra second, so we told everybody it's 7 seconds exit separation, and all of our 10 groups left 8 seconds, we would actually be 500 meters longer by the end here. That's 50 meters for every second you leave. So there's quite a lot of effect that people not sticking to that number can have. So just an interesting thing, I think, is it's hard to think about these numbers when we're spotting. That's 1.6 nautical miles, I can tell you that. This distance here, for example, at Langer is 0.2 nautical miles. That's just an interesting reference for you to know as jumpers. So when we're saying the spot, if we say it's 0.6 before, it's 3 of those distances before, or about 1 runway length before the overhead. So we take all of those numbers, it's going to be a bit tricky for you guys to read, and we can formulate a chart of some kind, which tells us, based on the ground speed of our aircraft, how much separation we should leave between groups to create a horizontal separation in distance, which is what we were actually interested in. So this one, for example, ground speed of the aircraft is here, and if we leave for 100 knots, 7 seconds, that puts us in the bolder green color. It actually gives us 350 meters, so that's super safe, but we would still be safe with 6 seconds at 306. Now this is quite difficult to remember, so one thing we're hoping to improve soon is we're going to put these charts in the back of the aircraft. We're also going to have one for the pilot in the front. Oscar Hotel, when it comes back from its maintenance, will have a tannoy in the same way that Foxy does, so we can tell people this number in the back. Papa Sierra isn't quite there yet, and we're still going to be shouting the number at you for a little while longer. So the more experienced jumpers in the room, what you can do is try and memorize some of this basic chart here. That will help you at all drop zones. So I just memorized this one number. If we're going 100 knots across the ground, I know that that's 7 seconds separation. And you can always work up or down from that. For every 10 knots that we're going slower, you add a second. For every 10 knots that we're going faster, you take a second off. And that's a pretty good ballpark figure. The only thing you need to bear in mind, which people often don't understand, is if we look at this green line here, when we get to 40 knots, it suddenly starts getting a lot longer. And we need to leave really long distances. So if people are ever talking about a 50 knot ground speed in the aircraft or a 40 knot ground speed, that's pretty slow. We need to have big separation numbers to be safe. So if we get to 40 knots, for example, we're all the way up at 15 seconds. And that's quite uncomfortable as a skydiver, I find, to count in the door. As much as you know it's the right number, to just be stood there going 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, up to 15. And you can see people having this kind of internal struggle in the door. And they'll get to 10, and then they'll just go. So, you know how to count to 15. We knew that was the right number. What went wrong? They just can't believe that it could be such a long time.
Josh, before you move on. Sorry.
Yes.
So 7 seconds between exits.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like a 4-way team or 8-way, 15 seconds plus or minus just to get in the door.
Yeah.
So that number is really only relevant for like individuals getting in.
Yeah.
Do you care about incorporating the actual building the exit? Fine.
I do, but the jumpers need to do that themselves.
Sure.
So we don't know how long each 4-way is going to take. If they, if we're on a 8-second separation today, it can easily take 8 seconds to set up a 4-way. So
And the rest.
yeah,
Double that.
they need to climb in the door as soon as the group before is gone.
Right.
But it's
then
up.
equally, if you have bigger groups like that, there's less groups on the plane, so
Yeah.
you can have more
Sure.
population.
Sure.
Yeah. So I'll come on to that in a second. A couple more slides. This one's quite interesting. Most skydiving aircraft nowadays use a Garmin GPS. So if you did happen to be at a drop zone where you can't easily access the information, if you find that column, the one with knots on it is a clue, and GS for ground speed, that's telling you the ground speed of the aircraft, which is quite a cool thing to know. You can also read the distance of the GPS as well. Fairly easy for people with a bit of experience to read. However, you must make sure that you're actually applying that information in the correct way. I've had it when I've been flying, and I've just been climbing over the mountains in Norway, happy as Larry. Someone looked over at my GPS and went, 120 knots. Fast today, guys. Only 5 seconds exit separation. I just looked at them like, what? We're not going the right direction. And I'm climbing at a different speed. So if you're going to use the information, make sure you know what you're looking at and how to interpret that. You can find it readily available by looking at the screen. So the fudge factor, this is what Pookie was alluding to. The jump master needs to apply the experience. If we have only a few groups, as Chris pointed out, we might only have 2 groups. Well, let's leave extra separation. We've got all the jump run in the world. No point getting out straight after each other. We could put 5 seconds extra on easy. Or if we've got lots and lots of groups, that 10 group issue we talked about, we can't afford to be adding any extra seconds. We know that an extra second per group is 50 meters extra for every second we leave. So we really do need to be getting people out as quickly, as safely possible, and spotting well between groups if you're the person dispatching them. Now, one thing where you guys can really help Richard and I with this, and with the spot, is just talking to us about what's going on. It's not always easy to see from the ground. Are you finding that you're too close? We might have based our numbers perfectly on the ground speed and done our maths, but it's just happening that, in your experience, this is closer than you're used to being to other jumpers. Let us know. We can add a second onto it, write it on our board down there, tell the pilots, just add a second, they're coming out a little bit close to each other. Or we really can't get everyone out in time. Again, let drop zone control know. We're trying to leave the right separation. We're running in this way, but we're just deep every jump. Let us know. We can do things with that. Maybe it's just a day where we have to plan to do 2 passes, whatever the wind's doing. And if we plan that earlier, it helps us avoid people feeling pressured to get out of the aircraft. So I do appreciate that we haven't been the best at publicizing this information. I know Gareth's got the charts on the way for the aircraft. We're going to get it put out on the drop zone control info board so that it's really easy for people to see, so that we can start to make exit separation easier for everyone. So your bit as a jumper then is to actually know these numbers a little bit. The more experience you get, the less excuses you have to not know what's going on. The few times where I find myself doing a tandem and I sit in the plane and I don't know what the run-in is and I don't know what the separation is, I have a word with myself, because that was actually on me to know that. And the same if you're A license, B license, C license, the more experience you get. If you don't know what the spot is when you get in the plane, you don't know what the separation was supposed to be, you need to just have a little chat with yourself. And actually, that was information that could have kept me safe. I should have spent a little bit of my preparation time finding that out. As much as I was dirt diving my jump, it's just as important. As Pookie said, it is the time between exits, not between the time that you climb out. If we're adding the climb out time onto these numbers, we could be adding easily 10 seconds onto the number. We're trying to get 5 groups out. We'll start putting people too deep out of the aircraft. So factor your setup time in. Know who's before and after you. So here at Langer, we typically put 3 flyers out first. Not going to get into that reason. The reason is more vertical separation, tend to have smaller parachutes. But because of the drift, they are actually a flat group after them will actually be closing on them throughout the jump. So the experience of a jump master, you should be thinking about, I'm a flat group, I'm getting out after a free fly group. This is a situation where I could actually add a couple seconds to my exit separation to mitigate the other factors. And I don't want to speak for Richard, but I know he's always believed in dynamic jump mastering, which means we don't just put them out in the order. We think about what order they're in and how that affects other things on the load. And spot, we're trying to get a lot of people out of the plane. Make sure you're looking at how far you're moving across the ground as you're doing that. Any questions? Yes, John.
You referred to the role of the jump master.
Uh-huh.
We all know the jump master's often the first.
Yes, this is true. And I'll talk about it more in aircraft emergencies in a way. And sometimes we have a jump master, but every time you're on a load, I really believe people should know exactly as much as the jump master knows. So if the jump master knows what order people are getting out in, you should know that as well. If the jump master knows what the spot is, you should know that as well, because they might not be very good at their job. And again, how more experienced people can help, as John pointed out, if the jump master's exited first, but you happen to be an experienced wingsuiter at the back of the plane, maybe just keep an eye on how much separation people are leaving. You can maybe stop them, or you could talk to drop zone control and just let them know those people were actually getting out really quickly after each other. Any other questions? Yes, in the back.
So separation is based on the ground speed of the air.
Correct.
Where do I get the ground speed of the air?
Correct. Good question. So you can ask drop zone control. At the moment, we're radioing that information down, but we intend to put it on that whiteboard that's on the DZ info board. And in Oscar Hotel and Foxy, we now have a tannoy system. So the pilot's they're actually going to say the exit separation number rather than the ground speed. So they'll just give us the number in seconds. That's one way, yeah. But it'll also be on the DZ info board. We're just going to try and put it out there as much as we can.
So
Yes, Ed?
Oscar Hotel and Foxy announced the exit separation. Is that just the standard one that jump masters can then flex as they see fit?
Yes. Yeah. So we don't know what size your groups are or these other factors. You need to adjust it, not too far down, but solos don't need as much exit separation. Yes, John?
Is there much difference in the running speeds between the short caravans and the long caravans?
No, shouldn't be. They both run in at approximately 100 knots true airspeed, 80 knots indicated.
Just one thing, just talking about being that experienced person that by the pilot. It's more of a request from everybody to don't be that person that's shouting down from up the front saying go go go.
Yeah.
That just adds stress.
Yeah.
And you might it's like, do you know that they should be going? It's like, no, the person that's looking out the door is the person that knows, right?
Yeah.
Or in theory.
Do it in the correct way.
And it's you get that a lot if you ever go to the States. You will get some people shouting door, some people shouting go, some people, and it's just ignore it.
Yeah.
Josh, in Foxy you don't have a line that you can cross, whereas the other aircraft do. Can you explain what that is and why that?
That's actually in the next part of my talk. All of the aircraft do have a line of some kind. I'll come on to it. So weight and balance, what it means. The aircraft can only fly in certain weight and balance configurations. If we have too many people at the front or the back of the aircraft might become unflyable. So the only way to really know what those numbers are to speak to your pilots. They're particularly important when we're doing larger groups. If we're putting more than 5 people really in the door of the aircraft, we might put the aircraft into a situation where we lose elevator authority. It means we can't keep the nose down, it wants to climb. So speak to your pilots. More experienced load organizers should be doing this job as we get into the larger groups. Let's see what can go wrong if we don't follow the numbers. Problem. So not a very nice situation for the pilot to be in, but also not for any jumpers left in the aircraft. If you were in that aircraft it might be nice thinking, oh, I've got a parachute, I can just climb out. You won't be able to. You'll be pinned to the ceiling, going round in circles with the pilot. Let's watch it one more time, just because I think the thing he says is really interesting. Everybody start coming down. Don't know if that was the full briefing or not, but we should be careful with our words. So there are a certain number of people we can put into the door of each aircraft and still maintain a flyable aircraft. It's actually different in our aircraft. So Oscar Hotel and Papa Sierra, as it stands, are 7 people behind the red line. And Foxy, if you actually read the placard, is 5 people behind the red line. And that doesn't mean that the aircraft are instantly unflyable if we get to those numbers. What I tend to think of it as is if we go above those numbers and you haven't spoken to the pilot, it will be a little bit of a shock to us. Okay, so up until 7, and if people just got into door as a 7-way, I would feel it was heavy, but I wouldn't be particularly bothered. If it's more than that number, I'm actually going to run the aircraft in a different way. I'm going to change the run-in speed. I'll probably have the flaps in a different configuration. So what I need to know from the jumpers is when that's going to happen. If you're expecting to put 8 or more people in the door of Papa Sierra Oscar Hotel, just give the pilot a little heads up before you're planning to do that. And we can anticipate it, or some pilots might ask you not to. They might ask you to come up with a different plan. So that's what load organizers are doing. If they have a big group, they climb in the plane and they say, first group's 7-way, just to let us know. It might not mean that they're putting 7 people behind the line, or more, because we shouldn't be doing that, but it means I can anticipate a larger group in the door of the aircraft and fly it in a different way. The numbers are going to be different at every drop zone you go to. It doesn't matter if it's a Cessna Caravan. They can be different between different Cessna Caravans based on the STC, the particularly jump kits they have approved. So the only way that you're going to know these numbers is by asking the pilot when you intend to do it. And then stick to those numbers. If the pilots ask you not to do it, don't put more people than that in the door, because these aircraft can and will become unflyable if we abuse those numbers too far, as we've seen in that video. Any questions on weight and balance? Yes, Henry?
Does it make a difference if the big group's going out with the rest of the people, rest of the jumpers in front, or the last group that goes out?
Yeah, it can do. So part of speaking to the pilot is we can come up with those sort of plans. So actually having more people staying up with the pilot, because they're in front of the wings, the center of gravity just can help us maintain elevator authority. We have less weight towards the back. So the other jumpers in the aircraft can help. If you see a larger group setting up in the door, well, stay right back up with the pilot. Don't go and sit right behind them, because you're just adding more weight into the back of the aircraft. Thank you. Question? Yeah.
I often find it quite hard to communicate with because of all the noise and stuff. Do you have any tips for how is best to communicate with the pilot?
Yeah, for sure. So our headsets are actually really good at noise cancelling. It's what we want. But sometimes there are times where we can't hear you if we're not expecting it. So times when the pilot is expecting to hear you can be the best times to communicate. So when we're taxiing out, I'm making a note that they probably want to talk to me at the moment. So I normally pop one earphone off for that. And if I've not given you a signal straight away that I've not heard you, it's probably just because I'm concentrating on something else. There is quite a lot going on at the front there. So they'll normally, eventually when they've heard you, give you a thumbs up. If you haven't got a thumbs up, it's not, I don't think, because they're just being mardy. It's probably because they haven't heard you. So get someone to give them a tap on the shoulder. It is genuinely hard to hear people in our headsets. They're designed to keep the noise out. So if we're not getting back to you, just give us a tap. Chances are we've not heard you. Yeah, Ed?
Apart from takeoff, are there any times when you don't want to be tapped?
Yeah, good question. Apart from takeoff and the jump run, no, probably leave them to it unless you deem it to be important enough. And then, yeah, we want to know. Is something hanging off? But otherwise, if it's stuff we need to know, then it's actually good to get that message to us before takeoff. Try and tap us. For example, one thing that sometimes people will try and tell us is about what passes we've got to expect. So pass at 4, pass at 6, and they can't quite get the message to the pilot before takeoff. Actually, it's really good to know that before takeoff, because it might influence which way we're going to climb out, for example. So We're not deliberately ignoring you, we just can't hear you half the time. Any other questions? How am I doing for time, Laura? Okay. Yeah, I'm going to skip a bit. So a little bit about AADs then, things worth some of you guys knowing. We have student or experienced AADs, and you're not necessarily using an experienced AAD just because you're experienced. There's probably plenty of people in this room who use rental equipment. So anybody use Skydive Langer rental kit? Just the one? Oh, okay. Sometimes our AADs in the rental equipment, the AAD will be in student mode. And what does that mean? Well, both sets of AADs, student or experienced, fire approximately 1,000 feet. And a student one fires when it reaches 2,500 feet per minute, whereas an experienced one, we have to be going 6,800 feet per minute in the descent to fire it. So if the aircraft is descending, if it is descending faster than 2,500 feet per minute, we could fire a student AAD. If it is going faster than 6,800 feet per minute at 1,000 feet, we could fire a experienced AAD. Now, the reason the experienced one isn't really a concern to us is because if we are descending at 6,800 feet per minute at 1,000 feet, we've got bigger problems than our AADs are about to fire. However, this one is very realistic. Descending at 2,500 minute through 1,000 feet is fairly normal for a jump plane on the way down. So if there's ever an occasion where we have to land with the aircraft, for example, and there's people in the back of the aircraft with a student AAD that is switched on, we either need to turn it off or make sure the pilot knows so they can adjust their descent rate to not fire it. Incentive for you guys to know that, even though you're not using a student AAD, is if the person in front of you is, and we are descending in the aircraft to land for weather or whatever reason, we don't want their pilot chute in our face, but we definitely don't want it getting anywhere near the door and potentially taking the aircraft down with it. So you might want to remind them of how their AAD is different from most of ours. What pilots tend to remember is if I'm under 2,000 feet, I go less than 2,000 feet in the descent, and then I won't have any issues. Brief bit about aircraft emergencies then. The only real thing I want jumpers to know about this is that not all aircraft emergencies are equal. They're actually very different. The two factors we really have that change our decisions are the severity of an aircraft emergency and the altitude we're at when it happens. So what I'm thinking about with severity as a pilot is my aircraft currently controllable and is it landable? Which means for me, can I keep the wings level? Can I fly straight? And can I control the airspeed, or as my nose pitching up? If I can't keep the wings level and I can't control the airspeed, the aircraft is slowing down, that is not a controllable landable aircraft, and the severity is actually pretty high. It's probably best as a skydiver to be exiting that aircraft. And the other thing you guys need to know as skydivers is what altitude we're at. The only thing the altitude changes is whether we're going to choose to want to land or whether we might exit on our main canopy or our reserve canopy. Whatever happens, the first thing the jump master should be trying to do is to communicate with the pilot and work out what level of severity the pilot thinks they have right now. Bearing in mind that your pilot is going to be trying to aviate, navigate, and then communicate in that order. The first thing they are trying to do is fly the plane and get it safely to the ground if they can. So if you're trying to communicate with them, they might not be able to just yet. Even if they're able to aviate it, the second thing they're trying to do is navigate it in that order. They're trying to get it safely back into their airfield or onto a field. The last thing they're able to do, they have headspace for, is to communicate with you as jumpers. So let them do the first things first, because that might help you, and then try and communicate with them about what's going on. Hopefully, the aircraft is in a state where we can safely navigate it back over the airfield and jump out and use our main canopies. And that might be the type of aircraft emergency we have. We might be at an altitude low enough that we choose to exit on our reserve canopies. And all you really should know as experienced skydivers is that if you don't already have a number in your head, you are a liability for the people behind you. If you're in the door taking 5 seconds because you don't know whether you're jumping out and using your main or your reserve canopy, you are slowing down everybody else from getting out of the aircraft. So if I can't say an altitude to you right now, and you immediately know whether that's a main or a reserve situation, you're potentially slowing things down in an aircraft emergency. So maybe know those numbers. They're not going to be the same for everyone, so I'm not going to suggest numbers. Any questions on that? I'm sure there's loads, but I could go on forever.
At what point would you expect us to open the door in an aircraft emergency?
Good. Depends on the type of aircraft emergency, I suppose. I, as a jumper, would actually like to have the door open before we land, if we're choosing to land with the aircraft. So let's go for that scenario. The aircraft's controllable, it's landable, maybe the engine stopped, we're going to land, it might be into a field. I, as a jumper, would actually like to have the door open. As a pilot, I'd just like to know that you're going to do it, but I would think, for me, it's the right thing for you to open the door. And the reason I have that belief is because I've seen that video in, I think it's Turga. And if you watch the speed at which they're able to get out of the aircraft after landing, it's really impressive. They land, and because they've already got the door open, they're all out of the aircraft within 15 seconds. It's quite...
And does that change the higher you get? What point is it? Because at this point you're aviating and navigating,
yeah,
and we're not getting anything. Is that something you expect us to do, or is it sit still? You know, is there some sort of, at what point should we be considering that?
I think you need to get that door open 1,000 feet and below. But again, I just think the pilot wants to know, but it's about to happen. But if we've decided absolutely that we're landing with the aircraft, then I think the right thing is to get that door open, because if we distort the airframe in any way during the landing, the door might not open after the landing. So that's why we want it open. Good question. Yes. Side door, yeah, should open. We always keep them unlocked here, but I wouldn't rely on it. Again, if the airframe is distorted enough, it's possible it might not open, but they should be more rigid because that is designed as the passenger door. You have the one opposite the jump door, 2 levers to operate that. If anybody ever wants to see how to operate it, I'd be happy to show you. And then we have the 2 by the pilot, which are also escape options. Just the 1 lever to operate them. They'll also be unlocked.
Can I just add to that? So Foxy has no forward bulkhead with the pilot, so the front co-pilot door becomes an accessible exit route, and that will also be the case with Oscar Hotel when it returns. From the door point of view at the back, yeah, as Josh says, almost all cases, opening the door just prior to a forced landing is the preferred opinion these days because of the risk of a skewed airframe and preventing them. One consideration that can come into mind is whilst the door closed restricts you exiting the airplane, it also restricts ingress into the airplane. And one consideration that has been cited is that if you believe you're having a forced landing into trees, you may want to choose, or the jump master may elect to continue having the door shut from a protection point of view. But that's the only example I've ever heard anyone voice as a potential theoretical scenario where the door being closed is a preference. But almost always, as Josh says, the preference would be as you get below 1,000 feet, considering having the door open. And of course, seat restraints are the next consideration. How will you remove the seat restraint? In the UK, we have carabiners on 2 of our aircraft here, and one with the sort of more rapid release clips, which could be easier to exit the aircraft. In the UK also, however, we're one of the few nations where we're all carrying knives. And so if we need to, we just cut the seat restraint if we need to be able.
Yes, John.
Can I bring up the subject of what height people take off their restraints and helmets?
Yes.
Because I know it's a good one for debate, everyone's got a different opinion. Yeah. But when I see people at 1,000 feet, when the beacons go off and everyone undoes their restraints and takes their helmets off, if the engine quits at that point, not many people are going to be getting out at 1,000 feet if there's a chance of gliding into a field. yet the chances of reaching down and even finding your restraint, let alone getting some of the more awkward ones done up again, before you reach the ground are actually quite low.
Yeah, so that's why Hibblestow have raised the altitude where that happens to 2,000 feet, and it's H's argument in the article they've written. My slight counter to it is I've seen how long it takes for students, for example, to get their seatbelt off. So the higher we take it, the altitude to leave the seatbelt on, there's scenarios where we might be not able to get it off. But that doesn't preclude experienced jumpers from delaying the height they choose to take things off or changing their procedures. I don't take my helmets off. I just wear them for the entire flight because I don't need to take it off. I'm just as comfortable. I can exit at any point with my helmet. And I tend to actually take my seatbelt off a little bit later because I just find it easier if the person in front or behind of me has stopped faffing with theirs when I'm trying to do mine, is all. So I think we'll be sticking to 1,000 feet here just because I think it's an easy to remember number more than anything. But that doesn't stop people leaving it on a little bit higher. And it doesn't stop you once you've taken it off, just keeping it in your hand perhaps until you're a little bit higher so that you are able to put it back on if the engine does quit at 1,000 feet, for example.
Is the chance of more seat restraints than there are jump slots? Because I know, there's often times when it never makes it to the back end.
It can be difficult. There's some rules around it to do with the aircraft of how many it's kind of kitted out to carry, if you like. But is a good reason to have the correct number, because it means actually if we get in and multiple people are struggling to put a seatbelt on, it's kind of a clue to us that maybe too many people have tried to get in. But yeah, we'll keep working to make sure people can reach them and get them on. Yep.
Doesn't that also feed into the fact that we said we wouldn't open the door to 1,000 feet, but you might have to be unrestrained to do that? So you're never going to get yourself clipped back in again if you don't start that process to the 1,000 feet.
It's possible to open the door, sat down next to the door. For me, I know it is. So it's just a thing. I could be clipped in. I could with one arm. I could open it. Humble flex. A bit of technique. I feel confident I can be sat next to the door. I could probably get it most of the way open. So the thing to think about then is who do we have sat by the door? If we've got 15 A license people on board and one person with a D license, should probably have them somewhere near the door. These are decisions the jump master should be making, staying somewhere that they can help in these kind of situations.